John and Jerry were two brothers who shared a bond that went beyond mere siblinghood, for they were also united in their affiliation with the notorious Black Axe confraternity, a cult group that had infiltrated the campus of their university. The brothers resided together in a cramped but cozy room within the confines of a student hostel, a space that was witness to their laughter, their tears, and their deepest secrets. John, the elder of the two siblings, had been the first to succumb to the allure of the Black Axe confraternity. His journey into the depth of the cult lifestyle was a complex and tumultuous one, marked by a mix of caution and curiosity. It was a path that had been unwittingly set in motion by his friend, Desmond, a charismatic and dedicated member of the Black Axe confraternity. Desmond's affiliation with the cult group dated back to his freshman year, a time when he had been swept up in the excitement and mystery of campus life. Over the years, he had risen through the ranks, earning the respect and admiration of his peers. Despite his involvement with the Black Axe, Desmond had managed to maintain a facade of normalcy, blending in seamlessly with his fellow students. John and Desmond's friendship had been forged in the fires of their secondary school days, a bond that had been strengthened by their coincidental reunion at the university. John had always been aware of Desmond's affiliation with the Black Axe, but this knowledge had not deterred him from associating with his friend. Instead, he had chosen to overlook this aspect of Desmond's life, focusing on the qualities that had drawn them together in the first place. It was against this backdrop that Desmond had extended an invitation to John to attend a party, innocently dubbed the Jollof Rice Party. John, oblivious to the true intentions of the gathering, had accepted the invitation without hesitation. Little did he know that this decision would set him on a path from which there would be no return. As John arrived at the party, he was greeted by the familiar sounds of laughter. The atmosphere was lively, with students mingling and chatting in a carefree manner. Desmond was nowhere to be found, but John was assured that his friend would join him shortly. As he waited, John began to mingle with the other guests, exchanging pleasantries and making acquaintances. It was then that he noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The tune had changed, the beat becoming more hypnotic and intense. The guests had begun to move in a more synchronized manner, their movements taking on a ritualistic quality. John's instincts began to scream at him, warning him that something was amiss. But it was too late. The die had been cast, and John's fate had been sealed. As he turned to make his way back to the entrance, he was confronted by a sea of faces, their eyes gleaming with an unnerving intensity. Desmond was nowhere to be found, but John knew that his friend had played a pivotal role in orchestrating this sinister gathering. As the reality of his situation began to dawn on him, John felt a sense of panic wash over him. He was trapped, surrounded by individuals who seemed to be operating under a different set of rules. The music had reached a fever pitch, and the guests were moving in a frenzied manner, their actions taking on a life of their own. It was then that John realized he had stumbled into something much larger and more sinister than he could have ever imagined. The Black Axe confraternity had him in their sights, and they would stop at nothing to initiate him into their ranks. John's journey into the heart of darkness had begun, and there would be no turning back. As John stood frozen in terror, the armed cultists descended upon him and the other unsuspecting guests, subduing them with a swift and ruthless efficiency. The music had ceased, and the only sound was the muffled cries of those who had been overpowered. John's mind reeled as he struggled to comprehend the sheer audacity of the cultists' plan. Before he could even process what was happening, John found himself being dragged away from the venue, along with the other captives. They were whisked away into the night, leaving the abandoned party venue to fade into the darkness. The journey was a blur, with John's senses dulled by the shock and fear that gripped him. He was vaguely aware of the vehicle twisting and turning through the deserted streets, before finally coming to a stop in a remote, densely forested area. It was there, deep in the heart of the bush, that John's initiation into the Black Axe confraternity began. The cultists, their faces obscured by masks, subjected him to a brutal and humiliating ritual, designed to break his spirit and remold him in their image. As the days passed, John's initial revulsion gave way to a numb resignation. He was forced to confront the reality of his situation, and the realization that he had been irreparably changed by his experience. The memories of his life before the initiation began to fade, replaced by the harsh, unforgiving word of the cult. John's feelings towards Desmond, the friend who had unwittingly led him into this nightmare, were complex and conflicted. He felt a deep sense of betrayal, mixed with a lingering sense of loyalty and friendship. It would take time, but eventually, John would come to forgive Desmond, and even reconcile with him. As John became increasingly entrenched in the cult, he began to see the world through different eyes. He started to appreciate the sense of belonging and camaraderie that came with being an Axeman. The rush of adrenaline that accompanied their violent exploits was intoxicating, and John found himself craving the thrill of the fight. It was during this period of intense involvement with the cult that John initiated his younger brother, Jerry, into the Black Axe confraternity. Jerry, who had always looked up to his older brother, was drawn into the cult's orbit, and soon became an active and enthusiastic member. Together, the two brothers cut a sword through their neighborhood, striking fear into the hearts of their rivals and enemies. They were a formidable force, united in their loyalty to the Black Axe, and driven by a shared desire for power and respect. It was against this backdrop of violence and intimidation that John's romantic interest in Favor began to blossom. Favor was a beautiful and alluring young woman, already entangled in a relationship with the leader of the rival Airlord confraternity. Despite the danger and potential consequences, Favor found herself drawn to John's charismatic presence and fearless attitude. She began to secretly meet with him, sneaking away from her boyfriend to indulge in stolen moments of passion and romance. As their affair deepened, John and Favor became increasingly reckless, ignoring the risks and warnings from those around them. They were caught up in a whirlwind of desire and excitement, driven by a fierce and all-consuming passion that threatened to destroy everything in its path. The clandestine romance between Favor and John, a member of the Black Axe confraternity, was a precarious balancing act, fraught with danger and uncertainty. Unbeknownst to John, Favor was already entangled in a relationship with the leader of the rival Airlord confraternity, a fact that made her secret tryst with John a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. As the days turned into weeks, the whispers of Favor's scandalous affair with John began to circulate, eventually reaching the ears of the Airlord's leader. The leader, a ruthless and cunning individual, chose not to confront John or Favor directly, opting instead to employ a more surreptitious approach. He dispatched a team of spies to surveil Favor, tasking them with gathering concrete evidence of her infidelity. The spies watched and waited, monitoring Favor's every move, until they were certain that the rumors were true. Meanwhile, John and his brother Jerry, accompanied by a few friends, decided to spend a night out at a popular club. John, feeling carefree and invincible, invited Favor to join them, unaware of the danger that lurked in the shadows. As they danced and laughed together, the Airlord's leader received intel about their location. He assembled a team of his most trusted squad members and set out to confront John. The club's pulsating music and flashing lights provided a surreal backdrop for the impending confrontation. The Airlord's leader, his eyes blazing with anger and betrayal, stormed into the club, his squad members fanning out around him. John, sensing the sudden tension, turned to face the Airlord's leader, his instincts on high alert. The air was electric with anticipation as the two rival cult members locked eyes, their mutual hatred and distrust palpable. The Airlord's leader, his voice low and menacing, confronted John about his relationship with Favor. John, refusing to back down, denied any wrongdoing, claiming that Favor was free to make her own choices. The argument quickly escalated into a physical altercation, with both sides exchanging blows. However, the fight was short-lived, as the club's security personnel intervened, separating the combatants. In the chaos that followed, the Airlords managed to spirit Favor away, leaving John to seethe with anger and frustration. As he watched Favor reluctantly follow the Airlords out of the club, John knew that this was far from over. The rivalry between the Black Axe and the Airlords had just reached a boiling point, and John was ready to take the fight to his enemies. The aftermath of the club incident was marked by a series of tragic events that would ultimately claim the lives of two young men, John and Jerry, brothers who had been bound together by their affiliation with the Black Axe confraternity. The first casualty of the conflict was Favor, the young woman who had found herself at the center of the rivalry between John and the Airlord's leader. In a brutal display of power and control, the Airlord's leader subjected Favor to a vicious beating, leaving her with severe injuries that would take months to heal. In the wake of this incident, John and Favor allegedly parted ways, and for several months, it seemed as though the conflict had died down. The confrontation at the club had not escalated into a full-blown confraternity war, and a sense of uneasy calm had settled over the rival groups. However, this tranquility was short-lived. After a period of about 3 months, John was brutally murdered by a group of unidentified gunmen who stormed his room, stole his valuables, and shot him dead. The initial assumption was that John had fallen victim to an armed robbery, and the Airlords were not immediately suspected of being involved. Jerry was devastated by his brother's death and struggled to comprehend the motive behind the assassination. Like everyone else, he suspected that the killing was simply an armed robbery gone wrong, and the Airlord's involvement was not considered a possibility. However, as the investigation into John's death progressed, Jerry began to harbor doubts about the official narrative. He couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to his brother's murder than met the eye. It was then that he approached the detective in charge of the case, who also happened to be an Axemen, and shared his suspicions about the Airlord's potential involvement. The detective's ears pricked up at Jerry's allegations, and soon, several Airlords were arrested and brought in for questioning. However, despite Jerry's accusations, the Airlords vehemently denied any involvement in John's murder. Tragically, Jerry's allegations would prove to be a fatal mistake. Not long after the arrest of the Airlords, Jerry was also brutally murdered by the same group. This time, there was no doubt about the identity of the perpetrators, as the Airlords claimed responsibility for Jerry's assassination. Their motive, they claimed, was revenge for the death of one of their own members, who had been killed by the Black Axe in retaliation for John's murder. The Airlords saw Jerry's allegations as a declaration of war, and his death was the ultimate price he paid for daring to challenge their authority. As the news of Jerry's murder spread, the community was left reeling in shock and horror. 2 young lives had been brutally cut short, victims of a senseless conflict that had been fueled by a culture of violence and retaliation. The tragic fate of John and Jerry serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of cultism and the destructive power of violence. Their story is a heartbreaking testament to the devastating impact that this lifestyle can have on individuals, families, and communities. As we reflect on the senseless loss of these 2 young lives, we must come together to condemn the culture of violence and cultism that claim them. We must say no to this lifestyle, and instead, choose a path that values peace, understanding, and nonviolent conflict resolution. Only by working together can we create a safer, more compassionate world, where young people like John and Jerry can grow and thrive, free from the shackles of violence and cultism.